Boy, you hear all these cross-current of things, not just different political views or now analytical views, but also coming from different disciplines. And so then you've got to reconcile what does a climate scientist or an engineer say to a lawyer or an economist. It sounds like a joke, right? And how do we get to using the regulatory authority under the Clean Air Act to address one of the most challenging environmental problem in history? And we're using something that was written 40 years ago to do. The EPA is compelled under the Clean Air Act to begin to mitigate harm after such harm has been identified, where it has authority to do so, and the Supreme Court said it had authority to do so. So with the demise of Waxman-Markey, the financial side of this had a serious setback, and there was no progress going on at the national level on the mitigation front for California's cap and trade program. So it will be the first economy-wide program in the world that introduces a price on carbon, and that is linked to Quebec. So California and Quebec will both make that step at the same time, and those programs are actually linked, and that emission allowances can trade internationally between the province of Quebec and California. Back a few years ago, and many analysts would have been talking to you and would have introduced the idea of a designed system. And a designed system that was efficient, ambitious, and comprehensive. And through the introduction of a price on carbon, and it would be coordinated at the subnational, national, and international level, and that we could design it. Now, analysts who look at this problem think if there's hope, the hope is from the bottom up, that it's through the efforts of individual groups and communities and states and individual nations, finding out what they can do, building coalitions with neighbors, and then from there, from the bottom up, we try to coordinate a global strategy. A total reversal from a design top-down approach to what's happening now, which is a bottom-up approach. Coordination in the sense of getting different jurisdictions to ante in for the level of commitments they can make, and then to coordinate in the way they do it, because if two different jurisdictions use different approaches, you can get sort of perverse outcomes and costs can go up overall. Back a few years ago when people had these debates about top-down and bottom-up, they pretty much dismissed bottom-up as like, well, I just told you some reasons that just seem insoluble in the classroom. But in the real world, they're getting solved. And that is the logic behind the Clean Power Plan. The prediction that if the current policy path is maintained, the U.S. will actually achieve that 17%. And so, astonishingly, the administration got back on a horse and started riding again, but this time it's a different horse. And it's a regulatory horse instead of comprehensive legislative or top-down approach. So the federal government imposes a standard of performance on the states, but it's an outcome-driven process. It entirely leaves to the states to decide how they are going to do this. So the state plans are due in 2016, then compliance begins in 2020. And states can convert from an emissions rate approach to what's called I hate the terminology, sorry, but I didn't admit it, a mass-based approach, or in other words, a quantity. So the states can do anything they want, they just have to show equivalence to BSER. And states are encouraged to work together because it's thought that this is going to reduce costs dramatically. Businesses locally are the first advocates to say, work this problem out. So yeah, these companies have been operating in an environment of uncertainty about climate policy for 15 years at least, and especially over the last decade. And this is really undermining the investment climate for the electricity sector. So BSER, the building blocks are the way that the EPA determined the best system of emission reductions, but states do not have to do these things. So it is as though the EPA has looked around either nationally for some technologies or regionally, like for renewables, where maybe it depends on how much sun or wind you have in some part of the country, so they look regionally to say, what is best practice? What is the best in the class? And then what this rule is doing is saying everyone has to be better than average. Everyone has to move to best in class over some time frame, because it's already demonstrated, there's a technical finding that it's been demonstrated at the state level that certain standards of performance can be met. And those are within different technology categories. So the first is at existing coal plants that you could actually improve the way they're operated by making them more efficient. And looking around, they identify, this is option one, the more stringent option, and most people are talking about this, but option two would be a little bit less stringent option, and probably it'll be somewhere in between, So 6% improvement in emissions in heat rates, or the operation of these plants basically is what this is standing for. 70%, the second building block is taking existing natural gas plants and increasing the utilization from about 35% of the time to 70% of the time, basically roughly nearly doubling how much they're utilized. Then the third is incentives for new nuclear, for maintenance of existing nuclear, and for the deployment of renewable technologies. And the fourth is energy efficiency. So they're actually regulating here a standard saying we can look around and see best practices that there's energy efficiency programs in place, and everybody moves up, is required to move up to achieving, well actually this doesn't show this very well, but 2% per year reduction, improvements in energy efficiency. This is demand side energy efficiency, like how you use things in your home. And so this option would lead to, throughout the whole sector, 25 to 30% below 2005 levels in the electricity sector. And then this could contribute really importantly to what's happening on an economy-wide basis to achieve that 17% goal. So we're already at around 9% of the way towards 17%. That has to do with the mobile source standards and all the stuff that states are doing. And to some degree, but not surprisingly less than you think, to the introduction of natural gas, expansion of natural gas. But this would take us from about 9% to past 15%. And then there's other things like regulation of methane and stuff, which people think will close the gap.